we're going to get into it. And here starts the Breakfast Club for 2023 Winter Edition. Goodness me, I was talking to my colleague Katie a few moments ago, and she told me there was something like 723 people logged in, which kind of, it's probably best if I don't think about that too much. But when I think to 9 years ago, and I know I always say this, but we started out with 32 people in a room at the Amnesty building in London near Old Street, and now there's 723 registered. I know that not everyone's going to be able to tune in live, but for now there's hundreds of you tuning in for a common experience to help each other. I love that. Thank you for making time, especially at this busy time of year. If you've not been to our Breakfast Club before, there's two broad aims. Number one is to help you, the manager or the leader of some fundraising team, get some ideas to help you in your fundraising. And secondly, some things that you might choose to share, pass on with your team this week, this month, to just help things go a little bit better, sometimes a lot better in the way you do your fundraising. My top tips for how to make the most of it. Number one, if at all possible, get yourself a pen and paper or some means of making notes, so that, like, who knows what it would be, but if across the hour there's 2, 3, 4 things you write down and decide to follow up on, who knows what difference that could make. But you've got to capture them in the first place rather than expect them to still be live for you in a week's time. And secondly, if I were you, I would decide from the start to have a time when you're going to reflect on these ideas and or share them with your team or share them with a key colleague. The act of deciding on that time will, like I say, increase the chances that you follow up and do something with the ideas or inspiration you get today. We plan to have a little bit of time. I know time is limited, but there will be a tiny bit of time to pose your questions to Esther and Ben after their respective sessions. If you do have a question, then please, so we can see in amongst all the chat, if you could start with in capitals the word question, that helps us find the questions when time is short. I know lots of you already subscribe, and thank you so much for supporting our show. But if you do not yet subscribe to the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast, then that would be my top tip from today. Because again, apart from anything else, it's completely free. They're always just half-hour episodes that I create, often with some wonderful special guests that I create this content with. We get an episode once a week or sometimes once a fortnight. And Fundraising Bright Spots, it's in Spotify and iTunes and Google Play and so on. And once you're subscribed, then it'll just pop into your phone when you're about to do some housework or a commute or a workout in a month's time or so. And who knows what lift that fundraising idea, an example, might give you long after this Breakfast Club. So in terms of the content today, in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's going to be sharing some storytelling tips and some actual stories to help you apply that technique in your fundraising. And then we're going to do a tiny Q&A. And then about 9:25, I'm going to hand over to Esther, who's doing a slightly different session to help you connect to some deeper meaning, deeper reasons why, and reconnect to your mojo. It's a wonderful session. So that's the second one. And we're absolutely going to get you finished comfortably in advance of 10 o'clock so that you can move on to the next thing, not in a rush. So if I'm just going to take my slides away. And it's my huge pleasure that I get to introduce my long-standing colleague and my very good friend, Ben. Many of you in this community know him pretty well because he's been working so hard for years, going out and about to different fundraising teams, doing these Bright Spot training sessions to help you. So he's familiar with many of you, but if you don't know him, he's been a fundraiser for many years, about 15 years or so. He worked for a long time at the NSPCC, and for a lot of that time, he was the lead in charge of new business corporate fundraising for the NSPCC and got some extraordinary results during that time. He is now Director of Consultancy and Partnerships at Bright Spot. He does these wonderful team days, among other things. And without more ado, over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Rob. Yes, I clicked on the wrong slide instead of unmute there, but it's lovely to see everybody. I'm really pleased to be here, especially because I know that the content I'm going to talk about will be helpful for you. So stay tuned for the next 15 to 20 minutes. But more than that, in October this year, I was very lucky to sit in a room for over 90 minutes and hear from Esther and her content. And it's just so brilliantly powerful to helping you with your own sense of purpose. I think that by 10 o'clock today, you will feel differently to how you normally feel at 10 o'clock on a Monday. And Rob is right. I have spent the last 18 years working either myself to help people choose to do more for my organization, sometimes my colleagues, but most of the time, a very high value donor or trust or company. And over the last 15 years, I've kind of split my time between Rob's right, getting good results with my team and with fundraising, great results most of the time, actually, and luckily training and coaching with Rob, lots of others. And I'm excited because this particular content is an obsession of mine. And over the last 6 months in particular, I've noticed some things that some organizations who I've met or heard about have done some things differently to most other people. And I'm excited to be able to share them. Because the nature of this content is around storytelling, please bear in mind that to try and help you understand it, I may well cover some areas that you might have could have affected you yourself. So please note there's a trigger warning to some of the stories that we'll talk about today through a whole host of different themes. So please do look after yourselves. Let's start. So this starts when I was talking to somebody called Sally Flatman. Now, the eager ones among you may have even listened to one of Rob's latest podcasts with Sally. It's an episode 143. For those that don't know, Sally has spent 30 years as a BBC journalist, primarily as a producer in radio, in national radio, on Radio 4 and local radio. And for the final few years of her career, she was actually the lead producer on something called the Radio 4 Appeal. Now, the Radio 4 Appeal is where you have 240 seconds, sorry, not 2 minutes and 40 seconds, which, to put that in perspective, if you've ever waited for a train at an underground tube station, while you're waiting for your train to come, if the doors have shut and then that train's disappeared and really quickly the next train has come, 2 minutes and 40 seconds is that gap between one train going and the other train coming on a London Underground tube. It's fast. Sally's whole job was to help a charity once a week on a Sunday morning to get the most from their 2 minutes and 40 seconds so that when they talked about their charity in front of about 3 or 4 million people on the radio, they could raise the most money. Now, the interesting thing is Sally gave everybody the same advice, the same tactics, the same chance to learn and use a script that she'd helped them with. And yet, 40 to 50 charities each year took part in the appeal, and they all got wildly different results. Today, I'm going to share with you what Sally told us some of the very best ones do. In fact, the way that she showed it to us was in one year, for instance, and I've been this sort of fundraiser. I've talked to people who've won this appeal. Sometimes you put all your time and energy in and you don't raise as much. I remember really early on in my career, I think we only raised about £4,000 from the appeal. The lowest raised is about 3,000. The most that a charity raised in 2 minutes and 40 seconds, over £150,000. Sally helped us to understand what the two were doing differently, and I'm going to share that in a minute. The interesting thing is, when Sally shared with me some of these ideas, it chimed with some of the organizations who I've recently caught up with, who about a year or two ago, we started talking about storytelling and how they could change what they do. And now they've noticed things are different. So one of them was an environmental charity, a sort of biodiversity charity, who often found it hard to explain their cause in a story-like way. They said, we're not a hospice, Ben, we're not a helpline, we're more environmental. It's a bit more scientific. Well, intriguingly, when they started trying out the same sort of ideas that Sally was telling those charities for her appeal to do, they saw a shift in their income. In fact, a year of focusing on these sorts of ideas help them go from £500,000 worth of income from high value donors to £1.5 million worth of income. And it's continuing to grow. They've had to get a new team because of it, because of the way they focused on this and what that's done with their ambition. I'm going to tell you more about that later. So stay tuned for the next sort of 12 minutes where we bring to life 3 ideas to help you. And in the final idea, I'm going to give you a chance to test one of the best Radio 4 appeals. So from everything we hear and learn, keep an ear out, see what you can take in, because you're then going to listen live to a Radio 4 appeal and see if you can notice what they did differently to other people. Now, one of the places that we'll start is with one of my favourite books called Made to Stick by 2 brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. And it starts with a story of someone called Elizabeth Newton. Now, Elizabeth was a graduate in psychology at Stanford University. And she wanted to understand how our brain works in transferring communication. And what she did was she got 120 people to think of the most well-known song they could possibly think of. It's the sort of song, I did this in a room last week, and if you could guess, most people picked Jingle Bells, for instance, or Happy Birthday. And this was done in the US. So there you were picking like the Star Spangled Banner, the most popular song they could think of. What they had to do was tap that song out, the most popular song, to the person next to them. 120 people had to do this. Now, before they did the activity, all 120 people were asked, how many times do you think the song will be guessed correctly when after it was tapped out? The most popular song you can think of, Jingle Bells, Happy Birthday. Last week, someone did Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Like the most popular song you could think of. How many times do you think it will be guessed correctly? And before they've given the activity a go, people say, how hard can it be? We think about half. Now, here's the interesting thing. After 120 people had tapped out the song, how many were actually guessed correctly? Not half, not a quarter, not 10%, not 5%, 2.5%. 3 songs out of 120 were guessed correctly. And as someone who has replicated this research again and again and again with rooms of 100 people, 50 people, 10 people, it's the same every time. Before people have a go at tappers and listeners, they think it will be easier. They thought it would be 1 in 2. But after they've actually given it a go, every single time, it is dramatically harder. Actually, 1 in 40. And the book, which is all about helping to transfer information when you are an expert and others are not, the book calls this the curse of knowledge. Now, if you've had a team day with me, you've even played tappers and listeners, maybe you can say in the chat how good you were at tappers and listeners. So you've heard of the curse of knowledge. But the reason I start with this is because the more of an expert you become in your cause, the more we hear about it, the more jargon we use, the harder it is for us to remember what it is like to not know this information. And I think you've experienced this. Last week, I coached somebody who said to me, I went on a project visit this week, Ben, and I said, oh, how was that? Was it inspiring? Was it fantastic? You visited your work. Now they do research into Alzheimer's. It was amazing. And she said, it was good. It wasn't as interesting as I hoped it would be, Ben. Like, in all honesty, there were bits that were quite boring and it was a hot day and it was quite stuffy. And what's quite interesting is that gave me a flashback to times when I've met people at my organization who were experts, put them in front of donors, hoping for them to be able to talk in a convincing and inspiring way because they're the expert at what they do. But when the donor was asking them questions and they were answering, it wasn't quite the same. And here's the thing that Sally said. The first thing she had to do was to remind organizations that the person on the radio and the person who you're meeting does not understand your work as much as you do. And that actually, the first rule is we have to work harder than we think to break this curse of knowledge. Remember, we thought half of the songs would be guessed. Actually, it was 1 out of 40. Now, if you've ever done a team day with us, they're focused on storytelling because we know that there's many things that can help break the curse of knowledge, but storytelling is one of the most powerful. In fact, Maya Angelou put it better than anyone else. As you can see on the screen, she's learned people will forget what you said, forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Stories do that. But it's one thing to find stories. It's a whole other thing to apply a set of skills and ideas to them to help them when they matter most. And that is what I began to see some of the most successful organizations doing. So the way they actually applied the storytelling ideas was different. And there's three key things they did. The first one was how deliberate they were with the order of their story. They worked really hard to show change. I'm going to show you what that means in a second. The second thing is they looked for things that stood out. They realized that some of the most concrete, powerful things about their story didn't come from a massive case study that was signed off. It came from one quote that was said, or one moment that someone remembered that was just too real, too shocking, too unexpected to forget. And they worked hard, if they found it, to use it in their content, in their conversations, in their applications, in the appeal. And then finally, they didn't just think of things from their point of view, they had extraordinary levels of insight. They were obsessed with understanding their audience. And I'll show you the difference between what most people do and what they do in a second. But let's start with the order of a story, because what we want to say is, whilst I think you know this, I think if I asked you to say, what do you think is the order of a story? I think you'd tell me this. Well, Ben, it's something like, who is the story about? What's the problem, the situation for them? What's the action that we took as an organization? And then what's the result? I think you know this. But the interesting thing is, because we're an organization, because we're charities, we spend most of our time in point number 3, the action, who we are. We don't spend much time talking in interesting terms about number 2, the problem, or hunting out or an obsession with number 4, the result. And I know this because I ask a room of fundraisers every time I meet them to just share stories with me, share stories with me. I must have had over 2,000 stories shared with me in the last 5 years. And the first time someone shares a story with me, it's very different to the second time when we start exploring this more. Because if you've seen the way that an advertiser does this, a marketeer does this, you know that they use a structure to help you see contrast, to help you see change, a before and an after. So, for instance, I was having an amazing day with the organisation called Age UK. And on that day, I asked for some stories to be shared. And an excellent fundraiser called Lucy shared with me a story about someone called Barbara. And now, this is the first way she shared the story with us. It was a lovely story. And she said that Barbara is somebody who calls their befriending line. It's a line that Lucy said she volunteers on once a week. And so she speaks to Barbara once a week because Barbara lives on her own. Um, and this week, Barbara, on the phone call to her, had said, I've just got back from the supermarket and I'm holding a picture frame and I've just put your photo, Lucy, in this picture frame because Lucy means that much to Barbara because Barbara lives on her own and Lucy's the one she speaks to. And she said, Lucy, your photo is top shelf on my cabinet. So if you imagine in her living room on the cabinet, she said, your photo is now top shelf there. Um, and I love that story. And when Lucy said it, everyone went, oh, that's a lovely story. And I think you can understand that. That's a good story of the result. I like that. That is an excellent story. But let's dive a little bit deeper. Because actually, if you look at the previous one, if you remember the scale, if there's scales on here, if I've got some content about the result, I want to know, let's go back up and understand a little bit more about life beforehand. So on the day, we started using this as a case study to dive a little bit deeper and asked a bit more about Barb. And it turned out that Barbara met her childhood sweetheart, Mike, and they married when they were young. And after they got married, they wanted to start to have a family and they started to try and have kids. But like lots of people, they really struggled. And eventually they turned to things like IV and they spent a lot of money trying to have kids. And after years and years of so much stress, Mike said and Barbara said, look, it's not healthy for us. We're spending a lot of money. It's not helping our mental health. Let's accept the fact that we can't have kids and let's save and save and save. And let's have holidays, but let's spend most of the time saving so that when we retire, we can have the life that we want. And so they saved for years and years and years. And then when they retired, Mike died suddenly 3 months later. And Barb, it turns out, nearly all of their friends had been through Mike. And so all those couples and families and friends that they'd had, gradually, as the weeks went by, they started to disappear because no matter how hard you work, if you're different to them, you just don't stay as close. And Barbara started just spending more and more and more time on her own. And by the time she was matched with Lucy, by the time somebody said, actually, perhaps you should talk to someone, she would just spend days on her own cleaning the house. It's a 3-bedroom house. And the only person that Barbara would talk to, Lucy told us, was pictures she had of Mike, her partner, that were on her bedside table, in her guest room, and in the living room on that top shelf cabinet. And as she was cleaning the house, she would talk to Mike, the photos of Mike, because that's the only person she would talk to. Occasionally, she'd go to the supermarket just to hear people's voices. That's why she went to the supermarket. She was matched with Lucy, Lucy said, because you have to fill in the things that you're interested in, like a dating site. And then you get matched with a volunteer. And then she said they hit it off immediately. And within weeks, she's noticed a difference in Barbara. And it actually turns out that Barbara sent Lucy a photo. So Lucy sent Barbara a photo. And when Barbara said, "Your top shelf, Lucy," she meant in my cabinet on that shelf, there's photos of Mike, and now there's photos of Lucy. She talks to supermarket staff about Lucy. She's got a different way of seeing things because of... Anyway, the reason I say this is the difference between the story beforehand, the result, and afterwards. And for me, the question is, what can we do to go further up the chain and understand more about the problem? What questions can we ask? Now, excitingly, after this, we went for a break, and one particular fundraiser with her manager stayed back. Her name was Christy, and she was furiously writing. And like you could see, they were deep in discussion. And I asked them what was up, and they said that next week we have a £1 million pitch. We've got a pitch next week, and just this concept of finding more and more little nuggets and diving into the problem. We realised we don't think we've done that enough. And they worked so hard, literally in the breaks, they were sitting there scrolling and scrolling. 8 weeks later, after the tea day, we had what I call a momentum webinar. And in that, Christy shared that they won the pitch. And I love this quote. She said, "I weaved in stories I'd heard firsthand, making it more powerful, and we won." I love this because it's one thing to hear an idea. It's another thing to actually apply it, to scribble down the notes, and the next time you've got a pitch, to choose to do something differently. I love that Christy did that. And the result, a £1 million partnership for them. It doesn't always need to be a £1 million partnership. It can just be the donors more likely to call you back or to get the next meeting. But I love that they applied this. Right, tactic 1, look at when you find a story, look at the structure and ask yourself, have I been able, like a set of scales, to show both the problem and the result? What am I doing to dive a bit deeper, to understand those real things that are happening? The picture frames, the difference between speaking to one and only having one and having Lucy's on the shelf. The second thing, and Made to Stick, the book, has an excellent couple of chapters on this, is to find the most unexpected or the parts that are just more likely to stick in your memory. I spent some time with Plant Life, a brilliant biodiversity charity, and the first time they said they were talking through stories with me, one of the things they said is, we give farmers sustainable land advice. And we've had one farmer who's now an ambassador of ours because he's been so moved by the advice that we gave him. And that's a good top line story of change. When we dived a bit deeper, and we said, when you say he was been so moved, tell me more, what do you mean? And a few people didn't have answers to that, apart from one person who had worked with him, who said, well, he said that this farm has been in his family for generations, and when he was growing up, he remembers dragonflies outside his bedroom door. He remembers birds, the sounds of birds. It was so noisy. And at night, he would remember the sound of owls. Owls hooting would send him to sleep at night. That's what he remembers about his childhood. He said, but my son, now we don't have dragonflies, we don't have birds, and he doesn't hear the owls, until they started working with Plant Life, who helped him to change the way he was farming the land. And as you can tell from the quote on the screen, he said, after working with them, I hear owls now for the first time in 20 years. In fact, he said, my son wakes up and can play and look out and run after the dragonflies. Like, for me, I liked the way the team very playfully started asking themselves, what are the actual words that he said? What's the stuff that was most memorable, most unexpected for us to find? I did some work with a charity called 10 of Us, a team day again, and they told us an amazing story of a woman who had been misdiagnosed for cancer. And she said, It felt more serious than the doctor was saying. I could feel that something was wrong, and I was adamant that I would eventually convince him it was wrong, but I didn't know how. After a year and a half of talking to the doctor, she eventually convinced him to double check her tests, and they realized that she had cancer. We dived a bit deeper and said, tell me more. When she said that she was adamant and that she'd noticed things, she said, that meant that she had to talk to her doctor, what did she mean? And she said, well, actually, I went on holiday, and while I was on holiday, I was getting a massage, a full body massage in Turkey. And the masseuse said, she felt a lump on my stomach that was so big, the masseuse said, but baby, because she thought I was pregnant. And that sent shockwaves to me because I suddenly realized just how awful that, like how bad that was. Because the masseuse, when I told her, no, I'm not pregnant, the masseuse said, doctor, you must see the doctor. She said she got home after the holiday and called the doctor, and the way she put it was she called the doctor 70 times to eventually get through and be diagnosed. But let's get really clear, the people in the room had heard her story before 2 or 3 times, but they hadn't heard that extra bit, the flight to Turkey, the baby moment, or she called them 70 times. What is the unexpected, the concrete, the real bits of your story that bring it to life, that give you a different reaction? The third idea is the extreme levels of insight. So let me show you what I mean by this. So there's a concept that if you've been trained by us or ever heard Rob speak, to help me most influence someone, I must first understand and appreciate their world. And Sally noticed this in the most successful Radio 4 appeal. We asked her what's a charity that went to extreme levels, and she said MAG, Minds Advisory Group. Like, how did they make every single second count? Well, let's show you first of all their results. Normal results versus what MAG did. The lowest, I've already told you, that someone could raise in 2 minutes and 40 seconds, £3,000. The average that someone raises, £20,000. How much did MAG raise? £98,000 in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. That is 5 times more than the average, 30 times more than the lowest amount raised. And to put that into perspective, every second of the Radio 4 appeal, if you raise the lowest amount, you're raising less than £20 a second, which still feels quite good to me, but less than £20 a second. If you're raising what MAG raised, it's over £600 every second. They've been given the same advice. They've been given the same amount of time to prep. Do you see the difference? What did they do? They went extreme on levels of insight to understand their audience. Do you know what Sally said? First of all, she said, they became a bit obsessed with who is a Sunday morning Radio 4 listener. So here's what I'd like you to do in the chat. Have a think. If you could picture a Sunday morning BBC Radio 4 listener, what are they like? I put songs of praise on because I think of my mother-in-law, Mary. If you're tuned in, Mary, I'm not sure you are, then hi. If we stay over on a Saturday with the kids, on Sunday morning, Radio 4 will be on in the kitchen. On another day, they'll be playing the Archers. It'll be on before Mary's getting everything ready to go to church. She's from a generation that I think is closer to the royals than us. Think about it. The Radio 4 listener, what sort of newspapers might they read? Are they more likely to be someone without children or someone with children, a parent? Like, first of all, you picture that audience who you're trying to influence. The next question you ask yourselves is, which celebrities would I use if I had this audience in mind? If I've got 2 minutes and 40 seconds, who appeals to them? If I'm thinking of Mary, I don't think it's Love Island sort of celebrities. I think it's a different sort of celebrity. When might this audience have come into contact with my cause? What authority figures or institutions do they respect? What newspapers do they read? Okay, now I've thought this through, how do I use my 2 minutes and 40 seconds? Here's what I want you to do. If hopefully you've got a pad or a piece of paper near you, maybe you can write who, problem, action, and result. I'm going to play the appeal. What I'd like you to do, based on what we've said, the structure of a conversation, unexpected real quotes, real bits, thinking through their audience, what can you notice that MAG do? Write down, either in the chat as you hear it, or on a piece of paper, some of the things that you've noticed, the real bits. I'm going to push play now. Have a listen. Write down stuff you've realized they've done because they've thought through the audience first Off you go.
As a parent, one of the greatest joys in life is watching your children have fun. This is just what Sadler, a farmer near Mosul in Iraq, was doing. Earlier this year, Sadler sat watching his young son and daughter playing music and dancing in the family home. His son then went outside to check on their sheep. The explosion that followed shook the village. Sadler ran barefoot towards the sound. His son had stepped on a landmine left behind by so-called Islamic State, killing him instantly. This is the inescapable reality for families in northern Iraq today. Sadler and his relatives fled their home 2 years ago as conflict raged around them. Now, as villages around Mosul are freed from IS control, families are returning home. If you live off the land, then home is where you need to be, but this brings them into mortal danger. For more than a decade, I've reported on conflict, but what I saw when I met Sadler in Iraq will stay with me forever. It's moved me to make this appeal to you. There are landmines everywhere, in the remains of houses, in fields, even in schools. Each one is sensitive enough to be triggered by a child's footstep, but powerful enough to rip apart a car. IS have left a deadly legacy. The British charity, the Mines Advisory Group, or MAG for short, has not seen landmines used on this scale since the 1990s, when Princess Diana put the issue in the spotlight. 20 years on, the world faces a new landmine emergency. For the first time in a decade, casualties have increased. Almost every hour, one person is killed or injured. All too often, it's a child. MAG destroys landmines before they destroy lives. Recruited from the local community, their teams of deminers are vital. A gift of just £40 could fund a fully trained deminer for one day. And it's urgent work. In just one village I visited, MAG teams destroyed more than 1,000 landmines. Every mine cleared is a life saved. Just £40 can help MAG find landmines before children do. And if you live in the UK and give to MAG now, the UK government will double your donation, enabling landmines to be cleared even more quickly. Your gift could protect a child's life, making it safe for them to play freely, go to school, and build a future. You can donate now.
Thank you very much. I love some of the ideas that we've got flying into this. You can, like the Princess Diana moment is like, it seems so shoehorned, but also so perfect for their audience. To be clear, I'm very aware that to do this, I've been playing around and stereotyping a bit. In no other part of my life would I encourage us to stereotype in such a way about a particular audience. But when it comes to trying to figure out the content that's most likely to move them, I can see this kind of working. What did we find? I love the ideas that we've got. You've hit the nail on the head. As a parent is one of the first things they say. Princess Diana put it in the spotlight. The narrator is the chief foreign correspondent of the Sunday Telegraph. If you're interested in the structure, then if you watch the MP3 play, they spend 2/3 of their time with loads of nuggets that help bring to life the problem. Some quotes, some one sentence versions of change, and the Britishness of the charity, because that's who they perceive the audience to care about. 4 steps you can do to choose better insight. Sally told us that she told the team about the types of audience that Radio 4 listeners had. And then the team worked really hard. They even got a focus group together. They tested the stories and the script that they had again and again and again and tweaked it. So this wasn't a one-off. This wasn't the first time. She said in the space of 9 months, it changed based on what the audience was saying. Sally said, were they different to others? Well, she said at one time, a charity came along and asked her at the end of the appeal, does Radio 4 play music? Compared to the MAG team who all woke up at 7:55 on a Sunday morning to see what they were all doing at that time in the day, to listen to the radio, to get into the sense of what it would be like to be that audience and the words you'd have to say to interrupt them. They tested it with their audience, and the way Sally put it was the speed with which things changed in 6 weeks from this constant testing. There's 3 things. I've seen some questions. I think this might help you with 3 things. If you are struggling to get close to your front line, if they're not always someone that you can talk to, then one thing that you might want to do, try a monthly story power hour. I bet last time I was training somebody, they said, well, I don't always get to see the projects, Ben. And we asked the question of 14 people, is there somebody in your organization who you've noticed talks in a more story-like way, who is more likely to have these quotes, who is closer to the front line? It could be your CEO, it could be a therapist on the front line, it could be someone who's builds the campaigns and then talks to members of parliament about them. But who is it that is closer to the front line? Once a month, why don't you find those sorts of people who you know are disproportionately better at sharing stories and get them on a meeting and ask them about the things that they've heard, ask them to share real examples, ask your colleagues to share real examples. We did this with a charity called Light for the World, and after the sessions, as you can see from the screen, 100% were more motivated, 95% of people heard something new, most people used it in their work, and they won a 10 million euro bid based on some of the stories that were heard in the Power Hour that they hunted out and used for applications. Max, on podcast number 48, he changed his team meetings. If you're in charge of a team meeting, add 10 minutes at the beginning. That's what Max did, for a chance for people to share real examples that they've heard. To get his team, help his team get closer to the front line, they volunteered at 4 times more projects, services, and local fundraising events than the nearest team. 4 times more, so that they all got firsthand more stories. Stories from the front line, stories from talking to donors. Hello, Max. And he even got a professional storyteller to come into his team meeting. These results meant that they ended up winning more partnerships. I believe there was £250,000 worth of value that they won from one. They got partnerships with local schools. Listen to the podcast. And then finally, make it your own habit. This isn't somebody else's responsibility. This is your own. If you haven't got the book, The Fundraiser Who Wanted More, I encourage you to get it. It's written by Rob. There's a particular chapter on a fundraiser called James, which actually was based on what I learnt at the NSPCC. I used to have a pad like this one. This has got all my notes in it. Notes after notes after notes. And then once this pad was full, I'd get another pad and another pad. And even if I put a story in it, I'd kind of lose it. But I decided to shift that and bought myself a story pad. Now this pad is where I get some of the stories from here and I put them into that one. And when I did that, it began to totally shift my results. When I had a tricky objection, a tricky question, I had a story that could match it. £1 million pitch, we had a story we could find in it. It became famous for that. And other fundraisers have copied it and raised loads of money. You can take that idea, steal with glee, give everyone a story pad, but use the stories. Put them into thank you notes, like Becky did at the Stroke Association and smashed her target. Put it into conversations, put it into phone calls, and you'll notice a difference. I'm going to pause. Look at the order of your stories, find more unexpected real bits, and apply extreme levels of insight. I'm going to stop now. Good luck with your storytelling. Thanks very much, everyone.
Wow. Thank you, Ben. So much wonderful content there. Just while I'm bringing up my slide, you've said it already in a way near the end, but a common theme was lots of people loved the ideas, but either because they're a campaigning organization or because of current ethical policy in their organization of using case studies from people in a war zone, or a domestic violence type charity. I think it was Refuge. This is tough if I'm listening and I'm a fundraiser and currently feel like there's barriers to actually getting to the frontline message. It's not easy, but
No.
what would you try to do, Ben?
Gosh, it's really, so I think there's 2 things. One of them is, let's reframe what you think of as a story and a case. I think often we worry that it's a case study, something that needs to be signed off and written out. And yet some of the most powerful parts of the stories that I've heard have not been the bits that have been identifiable or that have broken confidentiality so that I know about them. You know, I can think of a story where I was told, somebody said to me, they experienced abuse when they were 6. And they said the abuse that they experienced felt uncomfortable at the time, but so did going to the dentist. How are they supposed to know how wrong that was? And there's these moments in a story that bring to life how powerful it is. And what we've noticed is those conversations are happening everywhere. They're happening between therapists in your teams. They're happening between the CEO who hears someone. They're happening when you meet someone in the pub. And our job is to find those types of stories and to help people know that I'm not saying I need the whole name all the time and who they are from. I just need to think through what can I do today to get myself slightly closer to that. So one person thought through in their campaigning team, somebody
Sorry,
who
Ben,
had
it's going to have to be the last idea now. I know
I'll
that's
stop.
annoying.
Thank you. Thanks.
Is that right? Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Wonderful content as ever. I need to keep things moving.
Go.
So if clearly this is a big complex topic, Ben's done a wonderful job in 22 minutes, but if you want to go way deeper and have Ben or one of my other colleagues for 7 whole hours with your team helping to solve the problems, then one thing you could do is find out about our team training in-house for your charity. We're going to put a link in the chat there, so you can just get in touch with us and find out more whether a training day on this kind of topic or any other might suit you. And also, just for the last 6 months, Ben has been taking his corporate partnerships expertise and going in way deep, sort of like our corporate partnerships mastery program, in-house with the charity, both the master classes and coaching, and talking to chief execs and so on. So do find out about the next level service with Ben if you like. Many of you on this call already know all about our Major Gifts Mastery Program and our Corporate Partnerships Mastery Program. So I'm not going to give you lots of detail, apart from that it's 6 whole months of our best stuff, masterclasses with me, coaching, lots of follow-up films and podcasts and other resources that makes a wonderful shift. The next one of those starts in April 2024, but again, you can find out more because the early bird discount is available now. Fill out the form we're going to put in the chat. But crucially, it's my huge pleasure now to move on to our second speaker. Our keynote speaker is Esther Kwaku. Now, if you don't know Esther's work, my goodness, you're in for a treat. She's a very experienced fundraiser. She's worked for lots of causes, including, for example, ActionAid and Concern Worldwide. She's worked for the Resource Alliance. She's the founder of a wonderful social enterprise called We Got Nerve that helps brilliant people in remote areas to start their own businesses. In terms of Esther's own business, she does some wonderful public speaking, facilitation, creative thinking, consultancy, among other things. She's such a busy person. She's a very accomplished speaker. I've seen her speak several times, including doing the joint plenary at the Chartered Institute Fundraising Convention. And like Ben says, just a couple of months ago, she was on stage at the International Fundraising Congress. So it's my enormous pleasure to hand over to the wonderful Esther.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rob and Ben, for having me in your space. So I won't give an introduction because that was absolutely brilliant. But thank you so much. And hi, everyone. How are you doing? So I'm Esther. I'm a teacher. I facilitate, I run workshops, I design powerful conversations. And as Rob mentioned, I run a social enterprise called We Got Nerve. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. Today, I really want to talk to you about purpose, passion, and power, which is a topic that transcends the boundaries of our careers and connects us to why we're here. So you can relax into this session, you can drop your shoulders a bit. This is your time, and just listen. Imagine this is a podcast. There's no slides. It's just me riffing with you around purpose. Because in a work world that is constantly bombarding us with the noise of deadlines and targets and expectations, it's really easy to get lost in this daily grind, so much so that we don't often pause to ask ourselves that fundamental question, which is, why am I doing what I'm doing? Sometimes that question comes at a point when we're a little bit stressed or on the way to burnout, or maybe deep in the burnout. And trust me, I have been there. So discovering your professional purpose, it's not a luxury, actually, it's a necessity. It serves as a compass that guides your career, that steers you towards fulfillment and passion and a deep sense of accomplishment. Because if we think about it, we spend a significant portion of our lives working. We're at work most of the time. And many of us, we want our work to be more than just a transaction of time for money or a strategy or a set of to-do lists, but more like a meaningful journey that really resonates with our values and aspirations. Perhaps you're looking for stepping stones towards a greater vision for yourself or a legacy that you want to build. So exploring purpose doesn't just benefit you as individuals, it's got a ripple effect, a big one. It extends into the wider tapestry of society. When you're purpose-driven, you're more likely to innovate, you're more likely to lead with empathy and contribute positively to your teams and your organizations too. So we're in a really rapidly evolving professional landscape. And so our adaptability is key. And so knowing your purpose gives you an anchor. It helps you to navigate challenges with resilience and pivot when you need to and make more authentic decisions as well. So let's not underestimate the power of this kind of introspection. Let's take our time and delve into that profound question of why do we do what we do? So I'm going to go first. And this is linked to stories a little bit. So Ben, you'll be happy about this. So about 10 years ago, I was working with an international NGO that supported people with disabilities. And I was one of the very fortunate fundraisers who got sent places. I got sent on field trips, as we often call them, to sit with really vulnerable individuals and communities and collect stories. So that was my job, was a storyteller and a story gatherer. And my brief was to bring those stories back to be used in campaigns and appeals and so on, and across lots of different channels. And I remember one of those particular trips that was really triggering. It was in Uganda, and I was sitting with a community. I was under the mango trees. Their homes were amongst them. And I don't know if you've ever been to a place like that, a place where, like Uganda, where there's a colorful woven mat that gets brought out for visitors to sit on. It's a bit like this. So these are the mats that they make, and they bring them out for people to sit on, and it's where stories are told. And I was listening to what they were saying and how they were talking about themselves, you know, with pride, assertiveness, confidence. And then I was looking at my brief, and I looked at them, and I looked at my brief, and I remember thinking, this doesn't connect. I felt a disconnect, because the brief that I was given wasn't the story that I wanted to tell. This is a long time ago, way before conversations about ethical storytelling and so on. But it really threw me. And I realized it had been building up for some time, this kind of purpose ethical dilemma. Sometimes this feeling is described as a term that we now know as moral injury. So this is when our ethics and sometimes our purpose are compromised at work. And if we're compromised too much, then our feelings can develop into something much more uncomfortable. Sometimes it can manifest into physical symptoms too. So I'm sitting there thinking, you know, I have to raise all of this money, I have to put on the heartstrings, I have to show absolute poverty. But what our Ugandan friends, folks, peers were saying they actually needed was not the brief that I was raising money for. So I came back to the UK and I kind of felt this sinking feeling of disillusionment, actually, because my purpose was thrown into question. And I campaigned internally and tirelessly. I wish I had Ben's notes at the time. But I left feeling burned out, and ultimately I quit the sector entirely, quit my job, just quit. I wanted to give myself some time and space to sit with this for a bit, because I had a burning desire to find other people, organizations who were making change happen in different ways and telling stories in a different way. So I set off on a mission to do just that. And actually, I went back to Uganda and I retraced my steps because I felt more free, more unbound. I interviewed people, I asked different questions, actually using a lot of the tips and advice that Ben was talking about just now, different angles, finding unexpected stories, looking at the order of things, the details that we don't often pick up on. And along the way, I challenged my own assumptions about what I wanted to do and why. So I came back with a bunch of data, a bunch of stories, and I set up Nerve. And so together with local communities, we shift the narrative around people's stories. And in doing so, and using a lot of local community members, we help brilliant people living in really tough environments to start up their own businesses by telling their own stories with their own voice, with their own agency. Sometimes they write their own scripts. Imagine a script written by, you know, someone for the Radio 4 appeal. So there's a real element of dignity and authenticity, and it's based on real curiosities, purpose. And I have to say, I love what I do. I love, 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 love what I do. So what is purpose when it comes to you and what you do? So purpose is, you could say, it's an aspirational reason for being. It's a deep conviction about what is true for you that inspires and provides a call to action. It's timeless. It's like a compass. It guides the direction for your life. And it's a human thing. It's not economic. And in your day-to-day work life, it's that intrinsic sense, that buzz, that sense of fulfillment that you get from doing work that is meaningful for you. Purpose can help you to understand why you're carrying out a particular mission, why this mission matters to your career, and how your career impacts your organization and the sector and wider society, ultimately the world that we live in. But I really, really, most importantly, I love what I do. So how do you love what you do? How do you know why you do what you do? One good place to start is by asking yourself some liberating questions, starting around your purpose and your values. Because purpose is a compass, as I mentioned before. It guides you to act in a way that's consistent with your values and beliefs. So we're going to try a bit of that. I want you to have a ponder and write down or think about the following questions. And if you don't have the answers, that's absolutely fine. Also, if you prefer not to engage, that's also fine, because sometimes you just have to be in the right state of mind to be able to really lean into this. But your mental, emotional, and psychological safety always comes first. So I'm going to go through them quickly, and I'm going to paste some of these questions in the chat as I talk through them. I'm sorry about the formatting. There you go. These are the questions. So I'm going to go through them quickly. And as I said, you don't need to answer them all because some of them are quite intense. But if a word comes to mind, just write down the first word that pops out. Use your gut, and you can build on that later. So I'll go through the questions now. So the first one is, what brings you deep joy and fulfillment, regardless of external expectations? If money were not a factor, how would you choose to spend your time and energy? What activities do you do that make you lose track of time so much because you're so engrossed in them? When have you felt most alive and connected to your true self? What are the values that matter most to you, and how are you aligning your life with them? If you had no fear of failure, what bold dreams or goals would you pursue? When do you feel a sense of flow where your skills and challenges are perfectly matched? When do you feel that flow state? What's the big picture that you suspect is there, but you can't see clearly? How can you use your unique talents and strengths to make a difference in the lives of others? And what kind of person do you want to become? And what steps can you take to embody those qualities today? I noticed that I swapped out question 8, but you get the gist. So remember that these questions are designed to provoke deep thought and self-discovery. I would really suggest that you take your time with each of these questions. Don't write down what you think others want you to say. Okay, be really open and honest with yourself. And also appreciate that your answers may evolve over time, and that's perfectly natural too. And with these answers, you can reflect on whether they match up to the values you think you have, okay, what you might be holding on to. So I'm not just talking about values such as truth, honesty, respect. I'm talking about different kinds of questions that can help you to really think through your values. And I'm going to paste some of those in the chat now as well. So feel free to take these away. And these are questions like, what do you spend your time doing? Where do you spend most of your energy? What do you visually consume on a day-to-day basis? Doom scrolling, anyone? What do you think about? What do you envisage for yourself, for the world? What do you say to yourself? What does that internal mind chatter say? What are some of the positive or negative drivers in your life? So things that are driving towards, or things that you're running away from. How do you talk to others? What do you say to people? What do you talk mostly about? What goals do you set for yourself? And who really inspires you? Maybe it's a book or an author, someone in your life. Who inspires you? You can also choose to amend or tweak these questions to fit you better. Because these questions are really powerful, I'm also going to talk about some of the ways you can create some space to actually think about some of these, because like I said, we're all really busy and we're 120 miles per hour sometimes. I also want to say that eventually, though, I came back to the sector and I still work very closely with nonprofits and charities in the UK and outside of that as well. I never stop reflecting on these questions. It's taken me on some really wild and unexpected journeys. I'm just saying, can't copy and paste. Okay, we'll make sure that we get those questions over to you. So in addition to those questions, you definitely want to carve out some space to think about all of them. So I'm going to leave you with some tools and some practices. I've got a big toolkit for this, by the way, but just some things to help power you up if you might be feeling a bit stuck, or maybe you're not feeling stuck and you just want something to affirm what you already feel and to confirm your purpose. And these are some things that you can actually do during your work time. So the first thing is just to slow down and give yourself and your team some space. So Ben had some tips earlier about, carving out 10 minutes at the beginning of your meetings for storytelling. So I would say, actually, try and see if you can leave a gap between your meetings. You might be doing this already, where you make your meetings 25 minutes instead of 30, or 15 minutes instead of 60 minutes. So what that margin of time does between, running from meeting to meeting is it just helps you to question things a bit more, but it also helps you to see where your alignments or misalignments are. The second thing I would suggest to you is to breathe. Breathing and mindfulness is so underrated, right? Those of you who do practice, mindfulness and breathing, absolutely bring that into work. Because when we're feeling uncomfortable or we're not giving ourselves space to think, our body tends to tense up and we breathe really shallow. And what that does is it puts the body into survival mode. And what do you think happens when our body's in survival mode? We actually rely on our unconscious bias. And we all have unconscious biases. Now, I'm not talking about unconscious bias in the DEI or culture aspects of things. I'm talking about unconscious bias in terms of a function of the brain. It's a function of our brain. Because at any one moment, we're processing 11 million bits of information. Did you know that? I didn't know that before. We're processing 11 million bits of information, but only 40 of those bits are being processed consciously. So the vast majority of what we're processing in our brain is happening unconsciously. Our brain is relying on mental shortcuts to be efficient, but can also be wildly wrong. And research suggests that our conscious beliefs can completely contradict our unconscious beliefs. So we have to tap into that a bit more. We have to think about the lenses and our views of the world, because they all come from different aspects. The culture that we grew up in, the curriculum we were taught at school, all the stuff that we consume on a day-to-day basis. So breathing really gives you a moment to step off the treadmill of your thoughts and be in the moment. So I'm going to try something a bit similar. It's not a breathing exercise as such, but it's a presencing practice, which you can do for yourself to tap into how you can think about this a little bit more. And it's a body scan. So I want everyone to, it's tricky because I can't see you all, but I want everyone to just get really comfortable in your seat. You can choose to do this or not, it's absolutely fine. But I want everyone to just take a moment for yourself and find a comfortable position in your seat and allow your spine to be straight and just let your shoulders relax. And then close your eyes. Or you can gaze softly downwards. And I want you to put both feet on the floor and cross your legs and connect with the ground. And then take a deep breath in Fill your lungs with fresh air and exhale slowly and release any of that tension. So begin by bringing awareness to your feet. Feel the sensation of contact with the ground. Notice any sensations, warmth or tingling. Any place that feels particularly warm or particularly cool. Pay attention to pressure. Where do you feel a sense of heaviness or lightness or contraction? And as you breathe in again, imagine drawing in all of that energy through the soles of your feet. And breathe out. Now shift the focus to your legs and feel the support beneath you. Acknowledge any sensations, whether it's the weight of your legs or any subtle movements. Breathe into any of those areas of tension, allowing them to soften with each breath. Now, bring attention to your pelvis and your hips. Sense the stability and the grounding that they provide, and feel the gentle rise and fall of your abdomen with each breath, that natural connecting rhythm. Move your awareness to your lower spine and back. Picture each vertebra stacked and supporting you. And with each breath, visualize like a wave of relaxation moving up through your spine, bringing a sense of ease. Now shift your focus to your chest and heart. Feel the expansion and contraction with each breath, connecting with the beating of your heart, which is a reminder of your life and your purpose. Bring attention to your shoulders. I carry a lot on my shoulders. Releasing any tension that's held there, and just let your arms drop a bit more by your sides or on your desk and feel the pull of gravity. Maybe notice any sensation in your hands, perhaps some warmth or subtle vibrations. And then move up to your neck and throat. Allow all of these areas to relax and create space for your authentic voice to emerge. And feel your breath moving freely through your throat. This is a symbol of expression and communication and storytelling. And then finally, bring awareness to your head. Relax your facial muscles, soften your jaw, and release any tension around your eyes. And then breathe into your mind and let go of thoughts that no longer serve you. Just get really good at noticing what's happening under your skin. And that also includes emotion, because sensation and emotion are very tightly linked. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. Welcome back. And so as you go throughout your day, your busy days, and Monday morning, see if you can find a place or a space where you can stop and pay attention to these sensations. I try and do this a few times a day. And I do this because your bodies, our bodies, can be a really great indicator of what's going on. I'm so glad. Right? Our bodies are instruments of perception. So when we're more aware of what's going on under our skin, we pick up on more information about ourselves and other people, and also about how we're responding to situations. So the more we tap into that, the more we can use multiple intelligences. And all of this links to purpose. So I'm going to finish off there. Oh, I'm so glad. What I prepared today was just a snippet, tiny, teeny snippet. I've got workshops and masterclasses versions of this too as well. I've also got a purpose toolkit, which I will share with Brightspot. It's got some templates and things that you can use, you know, around your inner circle of people, how to find your top strengths, and some guidance on how to write a purpose statement as well. But, you know, as you can tell, I love purpose because we don't have this conversation enough. It's super important. It's important for you because you do really important jobs. So let's dive into joyful work, people. Joyful work, right? This is supposed to feel good as well sometimes. Yeah, and you can come and find me on LinkedIn if you want to know more, because I think we've run out of time for questions, I imagine, but I'm really, really pleased. Thank you.
Wow, that was so Wonderful, Esther. Thank you so much for giving us a wonderful change of gear, change of perspective, and already it's so clear in the chat how even in just 20 minutes you helped us make a shift for me, both physically and also in terms of focus and meaning. So thank you so much. Yes, inevitably time's got away a bit. Actually, there are no questions, but I really encourage people to check out Esther's materials there. Just find her on LinkedIn and her website and so on. And yes, if in 20 minutes she can make this kind of shift for us, then clearly Ben experienced 90 minutes of this 2 months ago, and if you can get Esther's help for longer than 20 minutes, I highly recommend it. Thank you for making time to come and help us at Breakfast Club, Esther. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to get everyone away on time. Just before you rush off to your next meeting, I really recommend you, if it's simply 2 minutes, pause and write down any decisions or ideas or follow-up things you've decided to do, either from Esther or Ben or both. Please capture them before you move on to the next busy thing. Like I say, if we've helped you in this hour, then there's so much more valuable content for free in the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast. I know lots of you subscribe already, but if you haven't checked it out, please do try it. There's a half-hour episode I did with Ben about contrast and storytelling, which again will help you go deeper into some more tactics to do with making story work. And there's another one which is all about how to find them if you're in an organization where it's difficult. And I know there are several people in the chat saying that just is their reality. So do check out the episodes I've made with Ben of Fundraising Bright Spots. Like I say, if you'd like to follow up and get some more help with Bright Spot, either a training day with Ben or one of my other colleagues, or his next level corporate partnerships, or either of our mastery programs starting in April, do follow up. Obviously, there's the form in the chat, and also lots of information on our website, Brightspot Fundraising /services. Goodness, we got there. Wonderful content from Esther and Ben. I'm so grateful for all the work you put in to create today's session. Thank you to everybody for showing up. If you enjoyed it, appreciated it, and if you have a moment to share something on a social media platform, then like I said, that always just helps spread the word so we get great free content out to as many good causes as we possibly can. Yeah, next one, I'm planning to try and squeeze it into March. If not March, it'll be April, but we're in the spring, early spring, we're going to do another Breakfast Club. Thank you everybody for showing up. Have a best of luck for the next busy 10 days, and then I hope you all get a really decent break over the Christmas period and have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you. Bye-bye.